begin shortly. Please silence your phone, your electronic devices at this time, and remove your proxies. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet First Class Molly Lotch. It is my privilege to welcome you to this session of the 28th, 26th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium, made possible by our flagship supporter, the Class of '73, the Association of Graduates, and the USAFA Endowment, and many generous supporters. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Sheila Heen is a founder of the Triad Consulting Group and has been on the Harvard Law School faculty as a lecturer of law since 1995. She often works with executive teams, helping them to work through conflict, repair working relationships, and make sound decisions together. In the public sector, she has also provided training for the New England Organ Bank, the Singapore Supreme Court, the Obama White House, and more. Ms. Heen also has experience in working with the military. Last summer at Luke Air Force Base, she trained flight instructors to strengthen the feedback system used for pilot training. Ms. Heen also appeared on shows as diverse as Oprah, The G. Gordon Liddy Show, NPR, Fox News, and CNBC's Power Lunch. She has spoken at the Global Leadership Summit, Nordic Business Forum, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. Her activities have appeared in the New York Times, Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Harvard Negotiation Journal, and Real Simple. Ms. Heen is a graduate of Occidental College in Los Angeles and Harvard Law School. She is also schooled in negotiation daily by her 3 children. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to present to you Sheila Heen.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So, I didn't really want to start this way, actually, but if we're going to be honest with each other about the way that feedback forges our character, I kind of feel like we have to start with middle school. Do we not have to start with middle school? So, yeah, that's me in middle school. In addition to extremely advanced fashion sense, as you can see. In middle school, I wanted to be where you are. My dream was to fly. And in high school, I worked for an aviation company and thought very seriously about pursuing flying either at the Air Force Academy or at the Naval Academy. By the way, let me just pause because I'm feeling a little alone in this. Middle school was not kind to me. Can we agree on that? For how many of you was middle school not kind? Awesome. As I tell my daughter, my youngest is now 12, as I tell her, honey, if you peak in middle school, it's really not a good sign. Okay, all of the adults who are interesting, self-reflective, thoughtful people had a hard time in middle school and got lots of feedback along the way. And that is character building. It's God's little joke to keep us humble, by the way. So if we fast forward a few years, I really have my heart set on flying, but as I start to look into it, I discover that at that time, women were not allowed to fly combat class aircraft. And in my Top Gun-fueled mind, that meant that I was not allowed to fly what was worth flying. I don't think that that's true anymore, but at least my 17-year-old self thought that was true. So I shifted gears a little bit. I had my heart set on going to Stanford for college. I didn't get in. I went to Occidental College, which ended up being a terrific place for me. I did well. I had my heart set on going to Yale Law School. Say it with me, didn't get in. And I ended up at Harvard Law School. And at Harvard Law School, during my first year, I took the negotiation course, and I met Roger Fisher. And Roger Fisher was an extraordinary person. He fought in World War II in both the Atlantic and the Pacific theaters. And when he came home from the war, he found that of the 6 college roommates who did their freshman year together, and at the end of which they stopped out, as they called it then, I guess, to go to war, he was the only one who came home. And the rest of his life was really motivated by a sense that we have to find better ways to deal with conflict. And so taking his negotiation course was not just an education in negotiation, it was also an education in the world and what was important and why we were on this earth and what we should be trying to do together. And so I started acting as a teaching assistant and a research assistant, and when I graduated, I came on full-time with the negotiation project. And that's been my career ever since. We're going to talk today about feedback, and let me say a little bit about what I mean by feedback. Because I think it's easy for people to think, well, feedback is official stuff, like you do or don't get into the program that you wanted to get into, grades are feedback, annual performance reviews are feedback. That's all true. But when we talk about feedback this afternoon, I'm really talking about all of the spoken and unspoken feedback, the formal and informal feedback that we get every day. The indicators from other people about the way that we are impacting them and the world. And so part of what's hard about feedback is sometimes figuring out whether something is feedback, right? Like you don't get a response to your email. Is that feedback? Are they just busy? And if they're busy, why aren't you a higher priority even though they're busy? Maybe that's feedback. So the way that we came to this feedback question was really, I came on board in the early 90s. We were teaching from Getting to Yes, which Roger Fisher, Bruce Patton, and Bill Urey wrote in 1979. They founded the Harvard Negotiation Project. And we're teaching this stuff, and people are going out and using it and coming back to say, hey, this Getting to Yes approach and principled negotiation, win-win approach, is really helpful. It's helping me in all these ways. But I have to tell you that every once in a while, I'm running into a situation where when I try your approach, it's not really working. And in fact, when I try to use it, I actually think it might be making things worse. Now, Harvard being Harvard, we had a reaction that was maybe typical to that feedback, which was, well, if our approach isn't working for you, obviously there's something wrong with you. Yes? Like maybe you're not doing it right, maybe you need a remedial course. I mean, clearly you have to hire us as consultants, and we'll come in and show you how to get it done. But eventually I think we came to our senses and thought, well, maybe there's something here to learn. If Getting Yes talks about separating the people from the problem, what if the people are the problem? What if there's so little trust in the relationship that we're having trouble getting anything done together? And that's the work that really created a book called Difficult Conversations, which we wrote about 20 years ago now. So I've spent the last 20 years of my career traveling the world helping leaders with their toughest conversations. And on that list of toughest conversations, 100% of the time are feedback conversations. And that led us to get curious about what was going wrong in these conversations. And for the first 10 years, we did what I think everybody does, which is we said, well, we can help you with that. And we focused on training givers how to give feedback more clearly, more effectively, more often. How many of you already in your careers at one of the academies or professionally have taken a session on how to give feedback? You've been in some kind of training. Great. Was it helpful? Your enthusiasm is overwhelming. For those little voices that said, yes, sort of. Thank you. That's some of the work that I do. But actually, my experience is like yours. In other words, there is a lot that you can learn to be more skillful and more clear and offer feedback more often. And yet, we were noticing that it wasn't totally solving the problem. That we would come back 6 months later or a year later, and we'd say, hey, how are those feedback conversations going? And they would say, yeah, they're still not going very well. And one day it sort of hit us out of the blue like, holy cow, hold on a second. In any exchange of feedback between a giver and a receiver, it's actually the receiver who's in charge, right? It's the receiver who decides what they're going to let in and what sense they make of it and whether and how they choose to change. So maybe we've been going about this totally backwards. Maybe we should be trying to understand what is so hard about receiving feedback for all of us, by the way. And maybe particularly for driven high achievers. Because the feedback that we have for ourselves as a result can be among the most painful. And so what we're going to talk about is what we've learned about receiving feedback. And I'm going to argue that receiving feedback is actually a distinct leadership skill. And that if you get good at it, you don't have to wait around for a gifted mentor to show up. You can learn from anyone. And you can take charge of and accelerate your own learning. And as a leader, if you are good at receiving feedback and soliciting feedback that is meaningful and honest, well, that's also a teamwork skill. It allows us to get to the heart of the issue faster, to solve the real problems, understand the real problems so that we can solve them together. And I'm going to argue that receiving feedback is also a skill for organizational management, because how people exchange feedback amongst themselves informally, day in and day out, those practices and that honesty are what build the working relationships and the culture of the organization. And that's what enables engagement, learning, success, and excellence. So, what's so hard, after all? Just say thank you. Why is that hard? Well, part of what's hard is that receiving feedback actually sits at the junction of two core human needs. On the one hand, we do want to learn and grow. If you look at the happiness research, learning, growing, getting better at things is a big piece of what makes life satisfying, right? It's why you take up new hobbies in retirement. How many of you have started learning something totally new sometime in the last couple of years in your spare time? Yeah, you know you don't have time for that, right? But it's satisfying. So by the way, according to this drive, which I think is hardwired into the human condition, well, we should welcome feedback. It should be fun. It should feel like that gift that people are always telling us that it is. So why is it that it doesn't always feel like a gift? Why is it that so often I get the gift of feedback and I think, oh, this is not for me. I think this is for you, actually. I'm going to re-gift this feedback to someone else. And I think it's because we bump into this second core human need, which is the need to be accepted and respected and maybe even loved the way we are now. And the very fact of feedback can suggest that how I am now is not actually okay. That the people around me, my colleagues and my friends and my family, they just want a few upgrades, right? To my performance or my personality. And so I also think that feedback can be among the most painful experiences in our lives. And yet, how many of you would say that some of the most important things you've learned in your life so far have come out of some of your most painful experiences? Just raise your hand. Yeah, what is up with that? I wish that I could offer you a pain-free learning system, but that doesn't seem to be the way that it works. And so what I'm going to offer in our short time together are a few things that we've learned so that we can better understand the pain and we can get to the learning part a little bit faster. But this also helps me understand my conflicted relationship with feedback, that sometimes I welcome it, and sometimes I actually think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So I do also want to be clear that getting good at receiving feedback does not actually obligate you to take the feedback. In fact, some of us have people in our lives who are an endless source of criticism, correction, etc. Yes? How many of you have someone like that in your life? Are they sitting next to you? Okay, good. I actually think that in situations like that, putting up some boundaries so that you can say no to feedback is incredibly important and incredibly healthy. And so if you have someone like that in your life, turn straight to chapter 10, which is about boundaries. But what I want to do is I want to play with this idea of feedback that we don't take, right? That we push away, we think it's just wrong, etc. So I want to invite you, just think of a piece of feedback that you've received sometime in the last year from anyone in your life that you haven't taken. You rejected it. And just turn to the person next to you, take 20 seconds, and tell them why. Why did you reject it? Just tell them, well, you can tell them what the feedback was if you want, but with only 20 seconds, just give them a quick sense of why you rejected it. Okay, I want to collect some reasons because there are a whole lot of good reasons to reject feedback. So we're just going to collect a whole bunch of them real quick. Who wants to start? Why did you reject the feedback?
I didn't trust the person giving it.
Would you like to name names?
No, ma'am.
Yeah, so you didn't trust the person giving it, and what didn't you trust about them?
Like their credibility, or if they understood me and where I was coming from.
Yeah, so two things. One is, do they know what they're talking about, right? And do they know me to know whether this is even applicable to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Nice. There was another one over here. Yeah.
How it was delivered was emotional.
It was emotional and...
I rejected it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, that was pathetic. I'm definitely not listening to that simply because of how it was delivered, which was emotional, overwrought, etc. Demeaning, maybe. Keep going. Why else did you reject it?
Because I know myself better than they know me.
Really? What don't they understand about you in this situation?
My values.
Yeah, so it's not who I am, and it's not who I want to be. I don't want to be like that. I certainly don't want to be like you. So why would I follow your advice? Nice. Yeah.
I just didn't think they understood the full scope or complexity of the issue.
Of the situation. Like, that's great, but you don't understand the parameters of what was really going on. Totally. Keep going. Let me just grab a couple more.
I'll just say the personality style of the person was sensitive.
Yes.
And I'm not at all sensitive awareness of that. And so I just said, no, you're just too sensitive about this. This
Yeah.
is my son, okay?
Yeah, okay, so first of all, let's just put on the list any conversation between family members, right? But also, you just felt like the problem is not me here, the problem is you.
You're too sensitive.
You're too sensitive. Yeah, nice. Keep going.
I didn't want to face the truth.
Yeah, say more about that.
It forced me to look at myself.
Yeah, which is
Tough.
tough, not fun, because particularly when you feel like that is not what I was hoping to see when I looked at myself. Thank you for that.
That person was trying to sell me something.
Yeah. And you weren't buying it. No, you were not buying it. Yeah, they have their own motivations, right?
It was contrary to a value I held.
Yeah, so following it would mean that you had to do something you just didn't believe in.
Yeah.
Or be the kind of person you didn't want to be. Nice. Yep, one more.
So we became new parents this year, and we receive an overwhelming amount
Oh,
of unsolicited
yes.
parenting
Oh, yes.
advice and judgments. So
Yes.
it's just so much conflicting advice. You can't follow all of it.
Yeah, it's like, okay, the last person who criticized me gave me the opposite advice, right? And I'm just overwhelmed. I have to figure this out for myself. Fair enough? Okay, anybody who has parenting advice right here? No. She's eager for it. She's eager for it. So by the way, we probably have 800 different reasons that people rejected feedback. And I'm gonna guess that they're all really good reasons. Maybe. Here's the trick, which is typically we just decide a little too fast. We decide based on a sort of instantaneous triggered reaction. I don't know about you, but when feedback is incoming, I'm scanning it for what's wrong with it, right? Are you doing this? Who gave it to me? Why I suspect they gave it to me because they're trying to sell me something. What they're saying doesn't understand the whole picture. They're just wrong. It wouldn't work. It's not who I want to be. Where they gave it and how they gave it was pathetic, right? I'm really good at what we call wrong spotting, finding what's wrong with the feedback. I'm curious, how many of you recognize this? in yourself that you're good at wrong spotting? By the way, the smarter you are, typically the better you are at it. So now how many of you are good at it? Yeah, we have a spreadsheet of all the things wrong with the feedback. But here's the problem. There will always be something wrong with the feedback you get, I promise you. It could be 90% wrong. And that last 10% might be just what you need to start thinking about that might help, right? So it could be you didn't understand the whole situation. What you're suggesting isn't who I want to be, so I'm not going to follow that advice. However, maybe this is a bigger issue than I thought it was. So maybe I should start thinking about whether I need to come up with my own solution for how to handle it differently. That might be the 10% that is worth something. So what we found, actually, is that as human beings, typically, we have 3 kinds of triggered reactions when feedback is incoming, and we use that triggered reaction once we find something wrong with the feedback to toss the feedback out in its entirety. Because if I can find something wrong with it and toss it out, well, I can relax and go on with my life. But of course, it's just not that simple, black or white. Now, you guys, I think, hit on every single one of these, the 3 kinds of triggered reactions that human beings have when feedback is incoming. The first is what we call truth triggers. Is this good advice or bad advice? Does it understand the whole picture? Would it actually work? Etc. This is all about evaluating the substance of the feedback itself. The second is what we call a relationship trigger. And this has everything to do with who gave you the feedback. In fact, we often have a bigger reaction to the who than we do to the what. And now this is why your best friend can tell you things that nobody else can. But it's also why sometimes the people closest to us can't tell us things. I don't know if you've had this experience. By the way, my husband also teaches negotiation, so you can imagine what the conversations at my house are like. Anyway, he started teaching over at MIT at the business school, the Sloan School, a few years ago. He comes home one day and he says, you know that new colleague of mine, he sat in on my class today, and he had the most insightful comment about my teaching. I think it's really going to change things. And he told me what it was. I said, uh-huh. He says, what? Nothing. Nothing. He says, what? Okay, fine. I have been telling you that for 10 years. Hello? You know this guy for 10 minutes? Oh, he's the voice of God. He knows everything. I'm only the person who knows you the best, loves you the most. What do I know, right? Anybody else have this experience with people closest to them? Yeah, so when I get feedback from my spouse, I don't even code it as feedback. I just code it as him being annoying, right? So relationship triggers are interesting because the who and the what get closely interlinked, and they can work in a couple of different directions. Finally, the last kind of trigger is what we call an identity trigger. An identity trigger has to do with the story we tell about who we are, and it's painful when that story gets disrupted. Identity triggers also include the way that we're wired around feedback, because during the course of this research, we ran across some evidence that suggests that individual sensitivity to feedback, meaning how upset do you get, and how long does it take you to recover? Individual sensitivity can vary by up to 3,000%. And now we are all on teams working together, trying to give each other feedback, and in families, trying to give each other feedback. So, by the way, these 3 triggered reactions, kinds of triggered reactions, don't go away. The trick is not to let your triggered reaction be the end of the story, but instead to notice it and think, okay, is there anything here that might be valuable to me? At the end of the day, I can decide and throw out what is not valuable, but I need to look for what might be valuable here. And in order to do that and to manage these 3 triggers, there are just bundles of skills that help you manage them. The first are a bunch of skills around the challenge to see what in the world your giver is trying to tell you, and also to see yourself accurately. Because we all have blind spots. I personally don't happen to have blind spots, but I know that you guys have blind spots. The second are a bunch of skills around the challenge of we. How do I pull apart the who from the what so that I can actually hear what they're saying, even sometimes when the source might be suspect? And then finally, some skills around the challenge of being me. How do I understand my own feedback profile and the story I tell about who I am? And how do I give other people coaching on how to offer me feedback so that I can hear it most easily? Now, we're just going to dip into one of these and play around with it a little bit, and we'll start with the challenge to see. I'm going to put up a piece of feedback. I'm going to guess that every person in this auditorium has at some point either gotten this feedback, given this feedback, or you thought about giving it and you thought better of it. You ready? Turn to the person next to you, and you have 30 seconds to come up with as many different things this could mean. Imagine someone said this to you. Come up with as many different things they could be trying to tell you as you can. What could it mean? Okay, you've got 30 seconds. Go. Actually. Okay. Do you guys think you can call them out and I will repeat them so everyone can hear? I just want to collect a few. Who wants to start? Raise your hand. Yeah. The shirt itself looks bad. What's wrong with it? It could be a strange color. It's a strange color, right? It's ugly. Nice. What else?
They could think you're wearing it wrong.
You're wearing it wrong. You've got it on inside out, you've got it on backwards, you've misbuttoned it, that kind of thing? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, nice. What else? That's, of course, what many of us hear instantly, right? Nice. Keep going. It's inappropriate for the event. Like, that shirt would be fine if you were not leaving the house. Yeah? But definitely don't go outside in it. It's too old or too young for you. Yeah, I'm starting to hear that. Middle schoolers also have a lot of feedback for their parents. Have you noticed this? Yeah, definitely. You have no taste in anything. Like, forget it, it's not just the shirt. It's not just the shirt. Nice, one more. Yeah. They don't like you. They don't like you. Nice. So by the way, this is a pretty simple sentence. Notice how many different things it could mean. Over the last couple of years, we've collected answers, and I'm going to run them from sort of the most mild to the perhaps more upsetting. You guys hit upon a bunch of these. The most mild is maybe like, I just don't like that particular shirt right now. Oh, actually, now it looks fine. So the problem was with the shirt, but it was maybe temporary. Like, it looked wrinkled, but now the wrinkles are falling out. Or it looked like a funny color in the light, but now that you've stepped away, I think it's fine. So this is the most mild. It's actually the shirt, and it's temporary. I don't like the way those kinds of shirts look on you, right? Or it's not appropriate for the event. Now we're getting into it. More about the match between the shirt and you these days, somehow. You've never had any taste. I'm just trying to protect you from yourself, right? So this is feedback about your judgment, perhaps, or taste. Can you guys see this in the back? I've asked you not to wear that in the past. You know I hate that shirt, and yet you insist on wearing it and humiliating both of us, right? So this is really feedback about the relationship, perhaps. And then, of course, it's really not about the shirt. The shirt was just the final straw. Yeah. So by the way, what is the point here? The point here is that feedback usually arrives in the form of these very vague phrases, or labels, we call them, right? So people will say, you know, you're doing great. I need you to be a little bit more of a team player. You got to step it up. I want you to show more leadership, be more collaborative, be more responsive, be more proactive. Now, this could mean a million different things, actually. It's a little bit like this can of soup. So I get the general category of the food in that can, but in order to know whether I want to eat it, I just need more information. Now, by the way, we're just as guilty of this when we're on the giving side. So think of someone in your life who, if they would listen to you, you would have feedback for them. Do you have them in mind? Just complete the following sentence. I just need you to be more what? Say it to the person next to you. I need you to be more. This whole room is full of whispered feedback. Yeah. So give me a few answers. Not yourself. Yeah, that's pretty specific. Yeah. Responsible. Absolutely. Accepting. Give me one more. Open, realistic, nice. So by the way, whatever you said, you know what you mean, right? Like if this were an email that you were sending to them, the subject line would say, be more responsive, be more not yourself. And of course, you would include all sorts of examples. You would have video files of when they were or weren't open or accepting or responsible, et cetera. You would have footage and evidence of all the problems that this is causing everybody in your life. But the problem is that as the receivers, we can only see the subject line. And the subject line, that vague phrase or label, triggers a reaction based on either what we think it means, what we assume it means, or jump to mean, or just being frustrated, like, what does that mean? That's totally unhelpful, right? Or we disagree with it. That's not true about who I am. I am accepting. I am responsible. What are you talking about? And so the challenge is actually that before you decide whether you agree or disagree with the feedback, you just have to first understand it, to work to see what your giver means or is trying to tell you. And by the way, the givers in my life, most of them are terrible at this. Do you have the same givers in your life? They don't have time to give me feedback, it's off the cuff, they don't think it through, et cetera. And so really, I need to take some responsibility or share the responsibility for just understanding what they're trying to tell me so that I can decide whether it's useful to me or not. So the good news, by the way, is that your feedback always has a past and a future. So as a receiver, you can do one of two things. You can ask questions going backwards, looking backwards, thinking, okay, well, apparently this feedback is coming from somewhere. You observed something, you were frustrated by something, you expected me to handle something in a certain way. It had an impact on other people. You have some implicit rules about how this should be done that I broke. Somehow, some set of things happened that prompted you to say this to me now. Help me understand that. Or you can ask questions looking forward. Where is this feedback going to? In other words, if I were to take your advice, to be more responsive or more accepting or less myself, what specifically are you suggesting that I change? Sometimes when I'm feeling particularly defensive, it's easier for me to ask that forward-looking question because I quickly understand, oh, that's what we're talking about. That's not what I thought we were talking about. If I ask the backward-looking question, sometimes if I'm feeling defensive, I can get in a fight with them about whether they were really interpreting what I said accurately or remembering it right, et cetera. So the forward-looking question sometimes is a little easier for me to start with. Now, by the way, I mentioned that the other part of the challenge to see is to see yourself accurately. And part of what's hard about that, and particularly hard about that in hierarchy, is that the more experienced you get and the more senior you get, the fewer and fewer people are willing to offer you honest, candid feedback. And so as you move up the ladder or the chain and you have a bigger and bigger impact on everybody else, fewer and fewer people are willing to speak up to tell you about it. And so as a leader, you actually, as time goes on, need more and more advanced skills in eliciting feedback from other people. If you don't know right now what you should be working on, do you know who knows? Say it to the person next to you. Who knows what you should be working on? Whatever you said, the real answer is everybody else. Everybody else in your life knows what you should be working on. They actually have a list. It's a secret list that they pass amongst themselves of the things that you do that drive them crazy, that make it harder for them to do their job, right? But they're not going to tell you what's on the list unless you ask. And the way that we ask actually doesn't help. The way that we typically will ask for feedback is that we say, hey, do you have any feedback for me? What's hard about that question? It's too broad, right? It's too broad about what? Your performance, your personality, your pants, your shirt? I don't know what we're talking about. Number two, I feel like I should have prepared for this. Number three, I'm not sure how honest I'm supposed to be, right? So I'm trying to figure out what's the right answer here, and maybe particularly in hierarchy, but certainly with the people closest to us in our lives as well. So I'm going to give you a different question. And the key to this question is 3 words. The 3 words are, what's one thing? What's one thing? You can finish the sentence any way you want. What's one thing that I'm doing, or maybe it's something I'm failing to do, that you think is getting in my way? Or what's one thing that if I changed it would make a big difference to you? Notice, by the way, it's not, is there anything? Because if you ask, is there anything, what are people going to say? No, you're perfect. We love working for you. Right? We love being on your team. You're great. Instead, asking what's one thing suggests, I know there's at least one thing. I know you have a list somewhere, right? Just give me one thing off the list. So it does a couple of things. It signals I actually want honest coaching and suggestions. Number 2, it lowers the stakes because it's just one thing. And number 3, this is a simple practice that you can weave into your everyday life, because generally speaking, I don't think that improving feedback conversations in organizations is about having more 30-minute meetings. I think you can have much richer and more honest feedback conversations by weaving a few simple practices into your daily life. And as a leader and a colleague, if you start asking other people this question informally, once a month, ask somebody. Once a quarter, ask 2 or 3 people in different directions. Because, by the way, we assume that feedback has to come from the person right above us. But the person right above you often doesn't really understand what you do. Have you noticed this? And actually, it's the people that you're working shoulder to shoulder with day in and day out, or the people below you, who are incredibly valuable coaches for your own learning. So thinking more broadly about who could I reach out to and ask? Not only does it mean you will start to get honest feedback, but it also changes the relationship. While we were writing the Thanks for the Feedback book, we were working on this chapter, and I came home and thought, you know what, I'm going to ask my son. He's 16 now. He was probably about 14 at the time. And I was going to ask him even though I knew what he was going to say. I knew what he was going to say if I asked him, what's one thing that you would change about my parenting? Or that if I could change it, it would make a difference to you. I knew he was going to say more screen time. Because the screen time rules at my house are so restrictive that my kids are like writing away to Amnesty International because of their human rights violations. But I thought, well, what the heck, I'll ask him. So I said, hey, Pete, what's one thing that if I changed it would make a big difference to you? And he thought about it. And he said, more one-on-one time. He said, last year, because of the schedules, you and I ended up grabbing dinner together alone once every couple weeks, and schedules changed, and we just don't do that very much anymore. And I thought, you know what? If I hadn't asked, that never would have even occurred to him to mention. So if you want to experiment with this, reach out to the people around you and ask. By the way, once you find out what they say, I'm going to give you one more practice, and this practice is 2 questions. When you get really upsetting feedback, by the way, whether or not you asked for it or not, it often is unsolicited, you automatically are going to ask the first question, which is, what's wrong with this feedback? You're going to be asking yourself, and then you're going to be reaching out to friends and saying, oh my gosh, you'll never guess what so-and-so just said to me. Can you believe it? We need to go out for a beer. We're going to vent about it. We're going to make a list of all of their character flaws because I already started my list and I know that you have a list. You guys do this, yes? If I am in your office, I've just come down the hall and said, we got to get out of here because you're never going to guess what just happened. And you're my friend. What do I need you to say to me? I need you to say, you're right. Don't listen to them. He's crazy. He's worse at this than you are. That's stupid. You're great. By the way, is there anybody here who, when their friends come to vent to them, you do not say things like that? Because I could explain to you why you don't have friends. This is actually really important. Feedback is sometimes described as holding up a mirror, and I'm going to suggest there are two kinds of mirrors. The first is this kind, which we call a supportive mirror. A supportive mirror shows you back what you are like at your best, on a good hair day, under flattering light. And this is important because if I'm devastated by feedback, I'm too knocked off balance to be able to really take it in and understand it. I'm not in a good position to learn. And this one mistake or one screw up is my whole story about who I am. And I need this to help me get some perspective, to not ignore the mistake, but to see it in relation to everything else about me, which is pretty okay, at least. So being a supportive mirror for other people is really important to help them learn from their feedback. The problem is that this is where we stop. Once I feel better, I say, hey, thanks for going out for a beer with me. I'll see you tomorrow. Instead, when you're ready, ask this second question. All right, is there anything that might be right about this feedback that you think I'm not seeing? Is there anything that's sitting in a blind spot for me? We chose this, we call this being an honest mirror. And we chose this shape of mirror for a very specific reason. Where are you likely to see that kind of mirror? Hairdresser or barber shop. And when your barber or hairdresser hands this to you, what are they showing you? Something you can't see by yourself. So you are inviting your friends to help you see something that maybe you do need to see, and maybe you do need to learn from, and they are a trusted source to help you see what might be, what's the 10% that might be right about this feedback that you should at least think about. By the way, it was mentioned in my bio introduction that I spent some time last year down at Luke Air Force Base, and so now you know how meaningful that was to me. Because they asked me, would you like to go up, would you be willing to go up on a training mission? So that you can listen to the way that we coach over the radio, you'll come to the pre-flight briefing, you'll go on the mission, and you'll do the post-flight briefing. So you can really understand how we do feedback, and if there are ways that we can strengthen it. And I immediately said, absolutely yes. I have been waiting for you to ask. And so, indeed, I got to go up. It was a 90-minute, low-altitude training mission. So we were going 500 miles an hour, 500 feet off the ground. It's one of my favorite things I've ever done in my entire life. And I did not pass out, even though we, I'm told, did more than 6 Gs. And I did not throw up. And I have never been so proud of not doing something. There I am afterwards. I'm going to leave you with one last story as I close. A friend of mine, her name is Ann Garrido. She's a Catholic theologian. And in her role as a theologian, she's sometimes asked to visit people in assisted living or hospitals. And last summer, she was asked to go visit a woman in an assisted living facility who was 93 years old. And one of the things that Ann would say she's not great at is small talk. She's a theologian. She likes to talk about the big questions. So small talk makes her really nervous. So in true Ann fashion, she decided that she was going to prepare to have small talk. So she took her clipboard and she showed up early at the nurse's station. She asked a bunch of questions about the woman so she'd know how to make small talk with her. And one of the things that she learned is that at 93 years old, this woman still swims every day. And Ann thought, that's pretty cool. So she goes in, she introduces herself, she sits down, and she says, you know, I just learned that you swim every day. I hope when I'm 93, I swim every day too. And the woman looked at her and said, do you swim every day now? Anne said, no. Then you won't. Didn't go quite as well as she was hoping. But from my point of view, if you want to take charge of and share responsibility and drive your own learning, if you want to change the culture of your team and your organization, you got to start tomorrow. Take a couple of these simple practices. Talk about them with someone else. If you start swimming every day, 6 months from now, you're going to be having different kinds of conversations with the people who are most important to you in your life, both your professional life and your personal life. Good luck.
Ms. Heen, thank you for your message. If you have any questions for Ms. Heen, she'll be located stage right after the conclusion of this session to answer your questions. Thank you again on the behalf of our 2019 NCLS participants, the Cadet Wing, and the faculty and staff of the Air Force Academy. We would like to present you with a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Once again, we extend our thanks to the flagship supporter, the Class of 73, and the Association of Graduates, the USAFA Endowment, and all others who, through their generosity, make NCLS possible. We would love your feedback on how this year's NCLS. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey, which can be found up on the NCLS app. This concludes this session. Thank you.